Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you all to Satanic and Masonic ritual abuse, governmental mind control, an organized abuse survivor, loving mother and devoted wife, survivor small group facilitator, homeschool extraordinaire, and a woman who walks and heals all things with the power of the Holy Spirit on her side, Kate. In the tapestry of life, few threads are woven with as much resilience and grace as that of Kate, a woman whose story is a testament to the enduring power of faith in the human spirit. Born into a lineage steeped in the enigmatic traditions of Freemasonry, Kate's family tree bore the unmistakable emblem of the square and compass at its heart. On her father's side, her ancestry stretched back a millennium, the lineage tracing back to the year 1000. Yet the maternal branches of her heritage remained shrouded in mystery, save for the towering figure of her grandfather, a 33rd degree Mason whose legacy loomed large. Kate's earliest memories flicker like candlelight, soft, fleeting glimpses of church pews and the presence of her grandmother, a woman of Christian devotion. It was this grandmother who, when Kate was just 5 years old, insisted that her mother take them to a Billy Graham crusade. There, amid the sea of souls, Kate encountered the gospel in its purest form, simple, clear, and radiant. In that moment, she surrendered her young heart to Jesus, unaware that this act of faith would become the cornerstone of her survival. For even then, Jesus was her unseen protector, cradling her through the darkest shadows of her childhood, shielding her from the horrors of abuse so profound that her mind mercifully veiled them in forgetfulness. That same year, as Kate steeped into the world of kindergarten at an elite private school, her life took a chilling turn. The institution, privy to her family's legacy and her ability to dissociate, singled her out to be entered into clandestine government mind control programs. What could have broken her instead forgot a quiet strength, a resilience that would define her journey. Years later, after high school, Kate charted a path of service and healing, training first as a paramedic and then as a nurse. It was during the season that she met a gentle, steadfast man who would become her husband. For 3 decades, they have walked hand in hand, building a life rooted in love and unshaken by the storms of her past. Together, they welcomed 2 children into the world, precious souls who, like Kate, would face targeting by unseen forces. Determined to shield them from harm, Kate and her husband made a radical choice. They forsook daycare and embraced homeschooling, pouring their hearts into raising their children in a sanctuary of their own making. Today, as Kate reflects on the Luciferian agenda she believes permeates schools and academia, she feels a profound gratitude for that decision, a choice that preserved her children's spirits in a world that she sees as increasingly treacherous. Now, Kate lives a life of quiet purpose, working part-time at a group home where she tends to adults scarred by ritual abuse and schizophrenia. Her days are a ministry of compassion, a reflection of the healing she has found in Jesus. Through divine orchestration, he has gathered around her a small, sacred circle of 15 fellow survivors, kindred spirits with whom she shares daily prayers, scripture, and the tender exchange of their healing journeys. Together, they form a beacon of hope, lifting one another up with encouragement and faith. Kate's story transcends mere survival. It is a soaring anthem of triumph, an inspiring testament of the indomitable spirit of a woman who rose from the ashes of her past to blind the darkness that once consumed her. Against a past of unimaginable trials, she emerged not as a victim, but as a victor. her life a blazing torch of hope for all who falter in their darkness. In her unwavering faith, boundless compassion, and her fierce devotion to those who walk the same rugged path, we witness the breathtaking power of a soul redeemed. Kate is more than a survivor. She is a radiant force whose love and resilience ripple outward, igniting courage in the broken and rewriting despair into destiny. Her legacy is not bound by the shadows she once endured, but it's defined by the light she now radiates, a reminder to all that from the deepest wounds can spring the most glorious healing, and from the quietest lives, the mightiest inspiration. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, sharing any information privately with me, or submitting a written testimony for my upcoming book series, or to be featured on a Substack article, you can reach out via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. Additionally, I've teamed up with some of my favorite brands to offer you exclusive discount codes on products I love, such as Rife Technology frequency machines and CZTL's premium methylene blue. You can find all the relevant links and codes along with other resources in the show notes below. Your support across all platforms is greatly appreciated, especially as I've had to shift my alternative streaming platforms such as Rumble and X following the termination of my former YouTube channel. I've just started a new YouTube channel you can subscribe to at the handle @Imagination Podcast Official that I will be rebuilding as well. This transition to multiple platforms is crucial to continue sharing vital information to the public and disclosure communities. Thank you all wholeheartedly for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the world to me and especially to everyone on the show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, survivor, overcomer, whistleblower, and thriver, woman of God, voice for the voiceless, hero for the children, anti-child abuse and survivor advocate, fierce mama bear, and destroyer of the Luciferian kingdom, the one, the only, Kate. Kate, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's such an honor.
Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate your introduction. You know that the reason so many people want to be on your podcast is because of all the wonderful things that you say about us. We love it.
You deserve to hear it. It breaks my heart that you weren't told it growing up because you all are just the most incredible humans I've ever met. And you deserve every word and then some. I could make a whole book on you, Kate, and just, I appreciate your support over the years and your relentless, drive to support survivors. And it's really amazing to finally have you on the show. I didn't mention this in the intro, but you've been one of my biggest supporters for years now. Me, Lisa Meister, you've been on her show before. You have just been an absolute warrior for survivors over the years. And, I know you've received so many puzzle pieces in that support. Now you get to provide your puzzle piece to this platform and to others listening who are going to find so much divine inspiration and, validation and hope through your testimony. So it's just really an honor to finally have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You are so
So
welcome.
my birthday is the day before winter solstice, which means that my conception was near the spring equinox. And so I was satanic from the day I was born. I was born according to their schedule. And with that birthday, they wanted to put a claim on my life and use me for their nefarious purposes. But in spite of that, Jesus got a hold of me and led me to your podcast. And you have been my therapist, Miss Emma. When I wasn't able to find therapists, I turned to you and your guests and all of the stories that they tell for validation and confirmation. And after listening to brave survivors come forward to share their stories, it's carried me along and encouraged me to reach out to others and help them on their journey. The first of your podcasts that I listened to was Lisa Meister. I had just found her book, Only God Rescued Me, and had been invited to join her Facebook group, which is a group of survivors. And there I found a community of people who loved Jesus and had been through the same torture I had. So your season 1, number 28, with Lisa validated a lot of my experiences, and making friends in a community of survivors when you've been an outcast and a loner your whole life was like a balm to my soul. And finally, my crazy life started to make sense. I knew something bad had happened to me, but I had no idea what. And there were so many times when I tried to remember what happened and nothing would come. And it wasn't until I found this community of survivors through you and Lisa that I was finally able to make sense of everything. I was born into a bloodline incestuous Freemason family. Our family tree on my father's side goes all the way back to the year 1000 and has a big square and compass right smack in the middle of it. There are a few distant relatives who would count as royalty, like Catherine the Great and Charlemagne. My father's family originated from a castle in Hungary, and my grandfather was the final heir to the castle that was taken over by the government during the Second World War. His family moved to Scotland, where he met my grandmother, who was descended from the Sinclair or St. Clair family, who one of your guests, Gary Wayne, credits with the birth of Freemasonry and the Scottish Rite. My grandparents had a picture of Albert Pike, who wrote the Freemason book Morals and Dogma, and his picture was on the wall right in the middle of the family pictures. Albert Pike's book documents that by age 3, every child should be accustomed to every type of sexual act so that they can be used accordingly. My great-grandparents and my grandfather wore kilts in the Scottish Rite tartan to every special occasion. My granny used to make me repeat endless family genealogies. Andrew Sinclair, who was in the employ of King George III, was my 16th great-grandfather. There was a Sinclair who got in hot water with the law for indecency, which is a nice way of saying sexual abuse of a minor. So some of the relatives changed their name to Saint Clair in order to avoid trouble by association. You can imagine my astonishment when Gary Wayne validated this dusty family fact. My parents never had any interest in genealogies, so my granny decided that I would be the one to warehouse this information. My great-grandfather built a house outside of Minneapolis. At the time, it was in the country, and it was a great big stone house, and the house was surrounded by woods. In the basement, they put in a gigantic fireplace with an altar and the classic Freemason black and white checkerboard floor. The fireplace was big enough that you could have roasted a large hog, or, if the need arose, a human body. Over the years, my grandparents accumulated possessions, which included all of the great-grandparents' belongings and all of my grandmother's family's belongings piled up until the rooms were piled high to the ceiling. My husband and I had to clean out the house for an estate sale when my grandparents moved to a nursing home. The house was full of generations of wedding china, books, magazines, knickknacks, and there was hardly room to walk through the house. Now I know that hoarding is a trauma response, which explains why I also had to clean out my parents' house and why I'm constantly sorting and throwing things out at my house. Interestingly, while I was cleaning out my grandparents' house, I found an old flyer stuck in a book of the book was about Nazi doctors. And that flyer gave the date. I don't remember now what the date was, but it gave the date and said that Joseph Mengele was going to be speaking at the Student Union at the University of Minnesota. That was a very disturbing fact. Why would my great-grandparents or grandparents, my great-grandfather worked for the University of Minnesota teaching engineering, and my grandfather was a student of engineering at the University of Minnesota. So when I remembered that, that was very disturbing to learn that my family may have had contact with the famous Nazi doctor who invented mind control. And then I read in Wendy Hoffman's book called The Enslaved Queen. She validated for me that Joseph Mengele was in fact in the United States and did take a tour around to different American universities to talk about his mind control experiments that he did during World War II. And that fact can be validated with a brief internet search, and YouTube even has videos about Operation Paperclip and Joseph Mengele's university tour. Everything that I am saying today can be validated with a brief internet search.
Were you able to keep the flyer? Do you have that flyer?
No.
No.
No, it probably got thrown out because when my husband and I got overwhelmed cleaning out their house, my parents hired a company to come in and do it. And so it probably got thrown out unless someone at the estate sale bought the book and found it. I don't know.
That makes sense.
I should have kept it. So this is evidence of my dissociative identity disorder and why my mind is so fragmented. So from there, my notes jump to sorting things out at my parents' house. And when my mother moved out of her house where she lived with my dad, she sent me a family heirloom. It was the last piece of glassware from the castle in Hungary. It was a dark red goblet. I would even say a blood red goblet with the family crest on it. And it had a pure gold rim. From the first night, I put that goblet on my bookcase to display what I thought was a wonderful family lineage. I put it on the bookcase by my bed, and that night I woke my family up by screaming bloody murder because giant demons were crawling over me as I slept. I could feel their icy claws around my neck. Night after night, I prayed and cried to Jesus to make the demons stop and to make them go away. I couldn't understand why someone who had been a Christian all her life was suddenly being attacked by demons. And it was endless. Every night, 2 or 3 times a night, I would wake up screaming. And it wasn't until I made my husband take the goblet out to the trash and smash it that the demons stopped. And this was in 2017. And now here goes my memory skipping around again. My dad died in 2007. My mom had been by his side at the hospital every day. He was there with a rare blood cancer. And my dad told my mom that he wanted her to stay home for the day, the next day, and he asked me to come to the hospital and sit with him instead. I thought that was a strange request, but I agreed because I knew he was dying soon. That day at the hospital, he hardly said 2 words to me. I sat there all day wondering why he wanted me there. Finally, at 4:30 in the afternoon, I told him I was going to head home. He stood up and turned his back to me. He couldn't look me in the eye, and he said, "I'm so sorry for all the things I did to you when you were little all those years ago." And he proceeded to outline a horrific scenario of sexual abuse beginning in my infancy. I closed my eyes and sighed heavily. What was he talking about? I had no memories of my childhood. How did he do stuff to me and I didn't remember? And suddenly a flood of things came to my mind. I remembered a time when I was at college sharing a house with 8 other Christian girls, and some of the girls thought there was demonic oppression in the house. And they asked 2 women who were deliverance ministers to pray through the house. When they got to my room, all 8 of my roommates and 2 ministers crowded in. It was a very small basement room. One of the ministers looked me in the eye and burst into tears. She said my room was a room of great strength. She said that my strength came from enduring severe torture and abuse as a child. She was sobbing now so hard that she could barely speak. She asked if I remembered being abused. I said, no, not at all. I said I was raised in the church by Christian parents. I became a Christian at age 5. I wasn't abused. And after they left, I forgot all about it. Then I remembered the first time I ever went to a doctor. I was 22 and had never had a pelvic exam before. And as I was being examined, the doctor asked if I had ever been abused. He said that he had never seen such scarring and damage. He broke down crying and had to leave the room to compose himself. Again, I denied being abused. Then I had the flashback. It has occurred often over the years since my children were born in 2000 and 2001. I was holding a baby, and somehow I know that that baby's head is not attached to its body. A voice in my head screamed, "Stop! If we remember, we have to go back." It didn't dawn on me that I was listening to voices speak to me in my head. And I said, "Go back where? Why?" For the third time, my dad asked if I would forgive him, and I snapped back to the present. My nurse's trainee kicked in, knowing that forgiveness from family members will help terminal patients to go on to their death more quickly and feel better about dying. I said I forgave him, but I forgave him because I wanted him to die. Didn't I pray my whole life for God to kill him and make him die? Why? What happened and why couldn't I remember? My dad died the next day, and at his funeral, 300 people showed up. Countless people stood in line saying how my dad had made a difference in their lives and how he mentored them and taught them about the Bible. When I was 18, my parents had gone on staff with a very well-known Christian organization that I won't name. They mentored and counseled high school students and led Bible studies and took kids to spiritual conferences all across the country. I had no idea how my dad could be so wonderful to so many people and be so evil to me. I sobbed uncontrollably at my dad's funeral, but I was not grieving for him. I was grieving for how my life could have been if I had had a normal father. I thought my family was normal, but it wasn't until I married my sweet husband and was raising children with him that I began to realize how evil my family was. My husband used to yell at me, "Why won't you stand up for yourself? Why don't you stand up to them? Why do you let them walk all over you?" And my family was not the only part that was of my life that was evil. But before I tell you about the rest of the evil, I want to tell you about our good God and what he did for me and how he rescued me time after time. I was accidentally diagnosed with DID. I had to have a psychiatric evaluation for a medical procedure I was having in 2019. I filled out all the testing forms and handed them back to the psychiatrist. I was astonished when she told me I scored the highest she had ever seen anyone score on the DID assessment test. I got 100%. My friends tell me I'm an overachiever. um, she suggested that I get some therapy to explore this. And she asked me if I was ever abused. I told her how several people I had come across in my life told me I was severely abused, but I had no recollection of any abuse. And she said, well, then you definitely have DID. My whole life, I knew something bad had happened to me, but I had no idea what. It took me until 2021 to get up the courage to start therapy. And as I began to process memories, I also grew closer to Jesus because learning the truth about my life brought me closer to the one who is the truth. I learned right away that DID is not a disorder at all, but a superpower. It's the evil ones in the Rockefeller medical system that say DID is a disorder and that it's rare and that we are crazy and must get all our personalities integrated. It's evil people like CIA government mind controllers and Elizabeth Loftus who talk about false memories. But the truth is that Jesus, knowing we would be abused, put this superpower in our brains. He gave us the ability in the presence of debilitating, crazy making, psychotic, narcissistic torture to create new neural pathways instantly to take over and create thoughts, a life story, memories, and values. So Jesus built this fail-safe mechanism into our brains so we could be tortured at night and still get up the next day and go to school and learn and play with friends and interact with family members. When the evil ones tried to weaponize my imagination against me and exploited it for their own nefarious plans, I was able to weaponize my imagination against them while they were creating new personalities through electric shocks and torture. I also created some new personalities that I could use as defenses against them. And because of this, and Jesus helping me with this, I was able to defy them a lot of the time and not do some of the things that they wanted me to do. The first time I was abused, I was 2 months old. I asked Jesus to show me this in my memory, and he did. And I asked Jesus where he was when this was happening. And he gave me a vision that showed that he came to me and picked me up. He held me close and covered my eyes so I couldn't see. And this is what caused my dissociation. It was Jesus doing it. It was not the torture of being raped as an infant. And as I got older, he showed me how to leave my body. And in my mind, he took me up to the outskirts of heaven. He didn't take me all the way into heaven because that would have meant that my life on earth was done. But on the outskirts of heaven, we walked together in meadows filled with wildflowers. We flew with the birds and we walked on sunny beaches. I was always holding his hand. I never felt cold or hungry. Jesus and I feasted at his table, and he didn't mind if my table manners were bad. There was one person in my life who was not abusive, and that was my mother's mom, my grandma. When I was 5, she made my devil-worshipping mom take me and grandma to a Billy Graham crusade. And there he preached the gospel so simply and clearly that even as a 5-year-old, I understood that I was a sinner in need of a savior. He made it clear that if I confessed my sin, Jesus would forgive me. I begged my mom to take me forward for the altar call. I couldn't remember any of the bad things that happened to me, but I knew that there were bad things. And I knew that I needed a savior to save me from death in hell. And so you can imagine how I felt when my mom looked me in the eye with that look that said, when we get home, you're going to get it. And she said, no, I'm not taking you up there. In my first ever defiant act to my mom, I told my mom, fine, I was going by myself and started walking to the front. I didn't care if she left me there. I was going to get saved. I found a nice lady who led me in a prayer after she had asked me several times if I was sure I understood what Dr. Graham was saying. And when I told her that I was a sinner and needed a savior, she helped me repeat the prayer, and I knew right then that I was saved. She gave me a King James New Testament and a pamphlet about salvation. My grandma later wisely bought me a Living Bible translation that was easier to read. I was a precocious reader at 5, but King James, there's no way. I would like to say I read my Bible every day, but I'm not sure that I did. I know I read it often, though. Another thing that happened when I was 5 was my parents got assigned to infiltrate a church. They were supposed to go into the church and create dissension and divisions. But they were overwhelmed by the warmth and genuine love shown to them by the church. Shortly after our first visit, I was enrolled in kindergarten Sunday school with Mrs. Carlson. I hung on her every word. I loved her. I followed her around the classroom, hanging on to her skirt. I loved the Bible stories and the flannel boards illustrating the stories. For 2 hours, I had a reprieve from my family. After Sunday school, I got to sit next to Grandma in the big church, I called it. We would sing songs, and my grandma would give me Luden's cherry cough drops as long as I didn't wiggle in the pew. It was so good that summer of my 5th year. I had no idea things were about to get much worse. In July, my mother took me to kindergarten testing. I was going to attend the elite private school that my father had attended. There were 2 ways to qualify for the school. You had to have an IQ of 140 or above, or have a parent who attended the school. I had both. The testing was to determine if the child was average or could be part of the gifted and talented program. My whole school was a gifted and talented program, and everyone that was there was accessed and abused somehow. My IQ surpassed the requirements, and for one part of the testing, there was a tray that had several small items on it, and the items were covered by a scarf so I couldn't see them. The teacher told me that she would have me look at the items for 3 minutes, and then she would cover the items again, and I had to tell her what I could remember. She became quite excited when I told her all 12 items on the tray before she removed the scarf. She ran out of the room and returned a few moments later with a fat man in a suit. He asked my name and said, well, I'd say you are pretty well qualified for the excellent programs we have to offer. So they knew that not only was I dissociative, but I had a spiritual gifting of seeing things that were covered up. I know now that this gift was given to me by Jesus, and he's used that gift all throughout my life to show me that I'm on the right track. For instance, at one point, before I was even married or knew my husband, I saw in a vision my children coming in the front door of the house that we would live in when my children were young. And so when that same moment happened years later, I took it as a confirmation from the Lord that I was on the right path and doing what he wanted me to do. I've had that happen to me many, many times throughout my life, and it's always very reassuring. However, the evil ones wanted to exploit that, and I will get into that in just a minute. I didn't remember this part of my history until I heard Eric Hecker on your podcast. He talked about being in Project Stargate in 1974 and 75. Our school also had a Stargate class. Children ages 5 to 7 were taken to the school library. There was about 10 or 12 of us. We had to sit at tables and look at colorful images on a screen. I'm not quite sure how they accomplished that because it was well before our school got desktop computers when I was in 6th grade. I would have been kindergarten and 1st grade when I had to go to the library for these events. After we watched colorful images on the screen, we had to listen to strange sounds with headphones. Now I know that those sounds are like the dial-up tones for the old dial-up internet connection. Then they wanted us to find things by remote viewing. The first few times I did what they asked, and I was able to find the things right away and give an accurate location for them. All of the things were far away in countries that I didn't even know the name of. However, remote viewing was very troubling for me. Even now, talking about it makes me feel sick to my stomach. When I did remote viewing, it was like the Lord of the Rings when Frodo put on the ring and he's in the same physical place, but everything's blurry. And he goes to another dimension. And while he's there, the evil is attracted to him. As soon as I left our realm, it was like the evil could smell me and started coming after me. The other kids didn't have this problem, and my handler couldn't figure out why I did. I know now it was because I had the Holy Spirit in me, and the evil ones wanted to access that spirit in an unholy way. They really wanted me for this project because my remote viewing was the most accurate of any of the other students. But I got more and more scared, so I became more and more defiant and would refuse to cooperate. This went on till age 7. After we did the viewing, we had to drink a cup of medicine and take a nap on a mat. When I woke up, there was only a couple hours of school left. This had taken most of the day. I was always troubled afterwards because my private parts hit to sit at my desk on a hard wooden chair. After age 7, I stopped going to the Stargate classes and was taken to what was called the lab. My school campus had an elementary school on one side and a middle school on the other, and both schools were connected by an underground tunnel. Halfway through the tunnel was a blast-proof steel and concrete door that had to be opened by a pulley system because it was so heavy. Inside was a bright white room. On one side of the room, they had pelvic exam tables with stirrups lined up against one wall. Next to each table was a large machine that was regulated by dials and buttons that would deliver electric shocks. This is hard to talk about, sorry. There was a device that was a rectal probe. There was a vaginal speculum device. There was a penile probe and a urethral probe for females. And there was a helmet. All of these devices were for the purpose of electric shocks. They would often do spinal taps and deliver shocks to the spinal cord and brain by threading a wire into the spinal columns. These spinal taps are part of the reason why my lumbar spine has degenerated to the point where I need surgery to fix it. A few times a year, a man would visit and speak briefly with some of us test subjects, as he called us. I remember one of the kids saying that he worked for the CIA. I looked up this man over the last year, 2024, when I remembered him. And he later became, after working for the CIA, became chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And knowing that, that was under President Clinton and President Bush, you can look up who that was. I was able to find a picture of him standing in our school cafeteria, but shortly after I wrote about him in a Facebook post and added the picture of him in our school cafeteria, I was remotely triggered by direct energy weapons to suicide. I took 3 bottles of 275 pills in each. The pills were a synthetic narcotic. 8 of them at once would have been deadly, and I swallowed over 700. I had no idea that I had saved them. I used to take them for my chronic pain. My insiders told me that when I stopped taking them, we were made to save them and hide them. This man's picture has since been wiped from the internet, and the people who remotely triggered me should have known better, that they would be unsuccessful. You see, my husband was a paramedic when we met, as I was. We worked together in the ER of a level 1 trauma center. And I also had Jesus, who has pulled me back from the brink of death 7 times. I told my husband I took the pills. He quickly bundled me into the car and started driving towards the emergency room. Somehow I knew this was against my will and that I didn't want to do this. While my husband was driving me to the hospital, I had a massive seizure and quit breathing. He dragged me out of the car and did rescue breathing and monitored my pulse, which annoyingly kept stopping. I kept going out of my body and seeing my husband kneeling next to me on the side of the road. Thankfully, someone stopped and called 911 because my husband didn't want to leave me to get his cell phone from the car. The ambulance came quickly and took me to our local Podunk Country Hospital. They couldn't keep my blood pressure up, so they flew me by helicopter to a metro area hospital. I was on a ventilator for 8 days in the ICU while my body cleared out this massive amount of medication. It's not worth it for me to say the man's name. I have a beloved husband and children who would be too sad if they lost me. I have too much to lose by saying his name, but you can figure out who it is. I spent the next 3 months in and out of the hospital with pneumonia. I was unable to make follow-up appointments at my primary clinic. Every time I called, the phone was cut off. And my insurance was sabotaged. When I tried to see other doctors, I was told my insurance would not pay. I finally found a doctor who would pay, and I was able to schedule the follow-up treatment that I need. I know this sounds so paranoid and so crazy, but I can't help but feel that those who watch me were sabotaging my medical care in order to hopefully end my life. I developed 8 blood clots in my left arm and my left lung, and my insurance wouldn't pay for the medicine I needed for the blood clots, nor would they pay for the monitoring of that blood clot medicine. You had to have blood tests every week, and my insurance refused to pay for it. Here's a fun fact about Kate. In 2019, when COVID hit, I had used one of my stimulus checks to buy seeds and make a medicinal herb garden. I used aspirin, vitamin D, vitamin E, and cayenne pepper from my garden. My doctor in the hospital said it would take 6 months to a year for the blood clots to dissolve with the prescription medicine, but with my natural remedies, the clots were gone in 2 months and completely gone, which my doctor said is unheard of. Some of your other guests that have impacted my life are Gray and Carrie and Nathan. I also listen to their YouTube channels regularly. Their stories validated a part of my story that was unbelievable for me for a long time. I want to talk about the tunnels next. When I was 8, I had done something that pleased the unnamed man who oversaw our government mind control program at my school. So he let my handler take me on a field trip to the tunnels where we were going to buy some boys for the upcoming Halloween and Day of the Dead rituals. My handler was an 18-year-old recent graduate of my school. You recently put up a podcast where Gray and Nathan and Carrie talked about their handlers, so I would like to touch on this subject briefly. I don't remember his name, but we were trauma bonded, full on Stockholm Syndrome bonded. But I also had a trainer. I hated her as much as I loved my handler. I hated her in the strongest sense of the word. It makes me shake to even think about it. She wore cat-eye glasses with rhinestones in the corners and a turquoise and green paisley dress and a pillbox hat. She had that hat on all the time, even when she was giving me electric shocks. It was like her fashion sense got stuck in between the 50s and the 70s and never moved on. She drove a green Dodge muscle car. I don't remember what kind. She would park in the school parking lot and flash her lights or tap her horn to give us programmed kids instructions. This was our test for our programming. We had to hurt other children on the playground. One time she flashed her lights and I ran up to a girl who wasn't a friend of mine. I said, "Hey, can we be friends?" And she said, "Sure." Sorry, that was my mom trying to call. How ironic. You can leave that in if you want. I said, "Hey, can we be friends?" And she said, "Yes." And arm in arm, we walked around the playground. My trainer flashed her lights again, and I stuck out my foot and tripped my now former friend, who fell and badly skinned both her knees. I apologized profusely and swore it was an accident, but the poor girl never came near me or talked to me again. My relationship with my handler was totally different. You couldn't call it love because now, as an adult in a loving, committed relationship, I know what true love is. But at 8 years old, I thought it was love. My trainer did all the electric shocks and programming. She had been educated in this by Joseph Mengele, another time I came in contact with his legacy. And she never stopped reminding us of her Nazi connections. My handler rescued me and comforted me and stroked my hair, and his attentions were completely chaste. So he took me on a field trip, and we drove to the largest hospital in the city and walked right in the front door. We went down an elevator to the basement and wound our way through the hallway to the morgue. Somehow I knew the man working in the morgue on a first-name basis. And I knew that they would tell parents their child had died, and then the child who had been drugged at first would be taken to the morgue, where the child would be revived and then taken down to the tunnels. We went through a small door at the back of the morgue, which led to a stairway that went down seemingly forever. At the bottom, the door opened to a large underground tunnel. The walls and ceiling were cement, but the floor was like a dirt road. My handler told me that I could walk all the way to Texas or California or New York, and someday soon I'd be able to go around the world. He said that some of the tunnels were big enough to drive a jet airplane through, but some places were so small you could get stuck. He said work on the tunnels was going on constantly, day and night. We walked for quite a ways, and then we came to another tunnel that had a chain link fence over the entrance. Two women dressed in dirty, torn clothes guarded the entrance. My handler spoke to them, and they went back into the tunnel by the light of a flashlight. And I could see a group of children that stretched on and on into the darkness. The children had been silent when we walked up to the fence, and now they were moaning and wailing. The women stopped them and pushed them and cursed them and slapped them. They grabbed three boys out of the crowd that was full of naked children. Their bodies were covered with dirt and sores. The women called for a guard who unlocked the gate and let the children out. They had bright blonde hair and blue eyes. Their ages, incidentally, were 3, 6, and 9. The oldest one whispered to me when we were in the car that their mother had sold them for a hit of heroin. Their names were Thaddius, Thornton, and Thurston. The stories of these three boys and me is long and cruel and would for sure get your channel taken down. Suffice it to say that we were bonded by our abusers through trauma, and the youngest one was popped. Your listeners can look up what it means to pop the baby. This was done in front of me. Then Thornton was unalived in a similar manner in front of me and his brother. Thornton died in Thaddius's arms. This was done in a ritual for someone to get political power. I didn't understand what it all meant. Thaddius was by far the worst. He was tortured for days in front of me, and when I begged them to stop, they said that if I killed him myself, it would be faster. Otherwise, if I didn't, it would only prolong his suffering. The torture continued, and Thad begged me to end his suffering. But I knew if I did that, I would be crossing a line that at the time I thought I could never return from. I was sure that if I stabbed Thaddius, that I would be guilty of the fires of hell. I begged them to stop, tears streaming down my face. Thad grabbed my hand with the knife in it, and with his hand over mine, slid the knife into his heart. Thad and I locked eyes, and I stared into his until his pupils dilated and he was no longer there. I had no idea if he knew who Jesus was or not. I think maybe he went to heaven, but I'm not sure. And after that, I vowed that everyone I met would hear from me about Jesus and how he saved me. After that, there were many trips to the tunnels. I was being groomed to be in charge of something down there. Somehow, I have insiders in me that know the locations of all of the occult training facilities for government mind control training. Somehow, I know where all the breeder buildings are in my city and all of the things going on underground. Just to give an example of some of the things that happen underground, are that there are submarine docks underground on the East Coast and in Arizona and Nevada and Canada. I wonder if anyone remembers that Ghislaine Maxwell had a submarine pilot's license. I'm sure that this is why. Family, right under our feet are the most unholy, abominable things going on. And it's only the survivors that are brave enough, like Gray and Carrie and Nathan, who have the courage to speak about child breeding on a massive scale and underground shenanigans. I saw pregnant girls in cages. The cages were so small that the girls couldn't stand up, nor could they lie down flat except in a fetal position. But the breeders in cages had a big problem for the evil ones. The girls would die from poor nutrition, infection, and suicide. They would chew their arms to get to a big blood vessel so that they would bleed out. These girls are the daughters of the Rothschilds and their ilk who had been sold into breeder slavery. They hated me because I was free to walk around and be relatively free, but they didn't realize I was just as much a slave as them. Now, because the breeders die underground, they have huge caverns full of artificial wombs with babies in them. I know that is so hard to believe. But because of the way these babies are made, they have no soul. And because of this, they don't need to be held or cuddled. And they are only programmed to believe these soulless babies. I'm sorry, they are only programmed. They are not ever trained like I was. They didn't need to be tortured so that they would believe everything their handlers say. I believe these soulless babies in the Chimera underground will make up the evil army of the 200 million mentioned in the book of Revelation. Populations are decreasing all over the world. You merely need to do a brief YouTube search to find out how the Chinese population has been destroyed in the years since COVID. A country of billions now has a population of a few hundred million. Many Bible scholars have talked about this country of China as the only one who could possibly provide 200 million soldiers. But that country has depopulated so much that it would be impossible. That army will come from underground, and the soldiers will be the soulless abominations programmed for the height of brutality. Another thing happening underground, the evil ones are doing everything they can to desecrate God's creation. They have created Chimera that they have created grub children. These chimera are head and arms and chest of children who also have a genetic defect, making them have a nose like an elephant. From the chest down, they have a pink, hairless body of a grub. Their legs work like normal legs inside this sack of skin, so they are able to crawl around. This memory was validated by a video on the YouTube platform where it showed pictures, real pictures of these grub children washed up on the shore of an area across the water from Montauk Island. I never went to Montauk Island, but the stories that I've heard from other survivors make me so glad I was never there. Another creature I spent time with down in the tunnel was a dog man. Now, to be clear, this was not the genetic chimera of a dog man talked about on the Confessionals podcast, which are genetically half wolf and half man. These beasts are terrifying and they are everywhere. And I'm convinced that it is these that are causing the disappearance of many people. However, this dog man that I got to know was a surgical chimera. That means that a dog, a German Shepherd to be exact, had his head surgically removed, and a man had his head surgically removed. And the heads were switched so that the German Shepherd body had a man's head, and the man's body had a German Shepherd's head. This caused neurological and constitutional havoc for both creatures. They were miserable. The man's body, controlled by the dog head, urinated by lifting his leg on every corner he passed. The man's body rejected the raw meat eaten by the dog's head with explosive diarrhea. The man's body was desperately thin from malnourishment. The surgical wounds on their necks were festering, and somehow being attached to the wrong body caused them great pain neurologically. The sheer magnitude of what the evil ones are doing underground is mind-blowing. Nathan and Gray validated my memories of these things on your latest podcast that they did with Carrie. But the one thing I'm most passionate about is the children. There are millions of them down there. The International Center of Missing and Exploited Children says on their website that 8 million children go missing every year. I want to know why this is not front and center on every newscast that comes out. I want to know why no one but you and a few other people, Emma, are talking about this. This should be the only story on the news, that 8 million children disappear every year. Try and imagine that 8 million bodies stacked up somewhere because you know they're not alive anymore. Think about it this way. Imagine 24 million bodies. That's how many have supposedly disappeared since 2022. I submit to you that that number is a grave understatement because it does not take into account the undocumented children, the children that disappear through social services. We know that the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children is involved in child trafficking from your guest, Megan Walsh, whose children were stolen by their grandfather, John Walsh. This number of children does not include the social services scam or the undocumented children born to the breeders. The evil ones hide the breeders everywhere in plain sight. There are abandoned buildings full of them. There are even legitimately rented buildings full of them where the employees come and go in plain sight. Wendy Hoffman documented this in her book, The Enslaved Queen. I have heard hundreds of stories from survivors who gave birth to babies only to have their child be sacrificed to Satan or Molech or Ishtar, whatever name you want to use. I was supposed to be a breeder, but this is another way Jesus rescued me. I didn't start my cycles until I was 16, so they couldn't use me in that way. Also, I had become so defiant that they couldn't use me as a spy or messenger or assassin. So when I was 15 and was too old to be used by a breeder, they locked me down in the tunnels to try and scare me into cooperating. But instead of being terrified, I made friends. I told creatures and people alike how Jesus rescued me. This is what Nathan talks about, preaching the gospel to all creatures, preaching to them the good news of Jesus. When they found out what I was doing, they killed the dog man in front of me and started closed down programming. This was more brutal than any of the other programming. They renamed all my insiders names that in different languages mean silent or nothing. Look up the word Awrah, spelled Awrah, which is a Muslim word that means silent. Or Shoana, which is a Romanian name that means the quiet one. All of my insiders that had government secrets, spy or assassin program, they completely wiped clean their memories. They placed introject personalities in the core of my system to ensure that suicide if you remember and return if you remember programming would be carried out. Suicide, if you remember, is obviously what it says, but return, if you remember, means that I would return to the place of my original programming, which would be the house across the street from my childhood home. Somehow I believe that the people or relatives of the people who originally programmed me in my parents' satanic cult are still living there, and that if I go back there, they will reprogram me again. What they didn't count on was that my body remembered everything, but more about that later. They shocked me and shocked me and shocked me. They would induce a memory and shock me if I could tell them about it. They poked me with pins and needles, and they drugged me. And when poking didn't work, they shoved the straight pins all the way into the head and hooked electrodes to them and shocked me with those. But worst of all was the killing room. It was a large concrete room that's walls were lined with plastic, and there was a large drain in the middle of the floor. I was drugged and put in the room naked and freezing cold. When I woke up, there were about 50 Asian people in the room with me. Most of them had dirty white nightgowns on, like a hospital gown. As we were standing there trying to make sense of it all, steam came out of the vents in the room and we all fell asleep. When I woke up, the cold and the smell of blood made me vomit. I vomited blood and pieces of flesh. As I reclaimed my bearings, I noticed that all of the people who had been living with me there before were now dead, headless carcasses. Many had holes in their bodies from having their organs removed, which brings me to another topic that I feel quite strongly about. As a nurse, I can tell you there is something very wrong with the organ donation process. Almost all dying patients at the hospital where I worked were asked to donate organs, but it seemed to me that there were very many more organs being donated than were actually utilized. And they say they send those organs all across the country to be used by other people. But I wonder how an organ on ice can simply be sent on a 2-hour, 3-hour journey and be adequately perfused enough to be usable to another human being. It doesn't make sense to me logically. And illegal organ harvesting is taking place in all kinds of other countries where people are abducted and wake up missing a kidney. This again can be verified by a very brief YouTube search. Or all the homeless people who get into a van and are never seen again. Tyler Oliveira, another content creator, has documented on many of his podcasts about homeless and drug and gang activity and how people who live in the tunnels in Las Vegas find a dead body with their organs cut out. Or trafficking whistleblowers who have said on camera that they have to have surgical teams on standby to harvest the organs of trafficked children who are raped within an inch of their lives. What is being done about organ donation? There are way more missing people and missing organs than there should be. David Paulides is another content creator of the Missing 411 documentaries. All the people that go missing in national parks, which, all happen to be on ley lines. Nothing fishy about that, right? But I've heard stories of truckloads of people being brought to landfills to be buried or taken to food processing plants. You even had a community note about that, Emma, how bodies were taken into juice factories. They have to get the adrenochrome somehow, I guess. Your guests have blown the whistle on all of this. Duluth, Minnesota, where my son used to live, is a huge trafficking center because cargo ships full of containers come in from all over the world. I live in a small town where trains full of containers go by sometimes every 15 minutes. I sit at the railroad crossing watching the containers flick by and praying for the children that are in those containers. I live near a military base where the railroad tracks go into the base. Containers go in and empty cars come out. What was in those containers? The evil ones have also targeted my family. My son got his commercial driver's license when he was 18. He worked driving school buses for 4 years, and then he was hired by a bus company in a large metropolitan area with heavy drug using population. He was groomed for a management position as a dispatcher and scheduler. I was horrified to find out that most of the management at his company were Freemasons. During this time, my son had walked away from his faith. When he started attending church again, he began having conflicts with other managers. And when he gave his notice, they told him not to bother coming back to complete his last 2 weeks. It gave me the creeps because when he wasn't going to church, they were all buddy-buddy with him. But once he started back to church, suddenly he had no future with the company. And I would love to tell you about all the things they have done to my daughter and to my relationship with her, how they sabotaged our relationship. So she insists that we are toxic people. But I just can't give the details of that right now. It hurts too much. And don't even get me started on what they've done to my husband. That is a whole podcast in itself. And the worst part is that my husband doesn't even see that he is remotely targeted by these evil people. He thinks that a lot of the stuff that happened to him was just random. Oh, I wanted to talk about body memories. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It has been a life-saving book for him. Well, also, I have to include John Euler in that. Because of John Euler on your podcast and Bessel's books, I have been able to overcome a huge list of physical disabilities. In 2001, I began having chronic pain after my daughter was born. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and psoriatic arthritis. By 2006, the inflammation was so bad that it caused joint destruction in my knees and hips and spine, so that I needed 2 hip replacements, 2 knee replacements, and 2 spinal surgeries. By 2012, I was completely disabled. I had severe neurological symptoms that could be compared to electric shocks going through my body. My arm would twitch and my cup of coffee would fly across the room. I'd be laying in bed and my whole body would spasm like I was having a seizure. The worst part was the minutes between sleep and waking. I was having severe trouble sleeping because of the electric shocks. My doctor put me on 6 medications to assuage what I now know were somatic symptoms from my abuse. I had a constant sensation of being poked with pins everywhere, and I do mean everywhere. It wasn't until I began using cannabis that I got any relief from these symptoms. It was Bessel's book that showed me that these were symptoms and where they came from. And it was John Euler who helped me get my anxiety and depression under control. I've been able to stop using cannabis now, and I'm slowly weaning off all of my meds. Emma, your channel has been the therapist that I could never find. Therapists for these issues are very rare. I mean, how many would believe my dog man story? And I got accused of false memory syndrome when I told a therapist my story about holding the decapitated baby. You have provided a safe place for me to identify with other survivors and me to receive validation for my psycho stories. I can't thank you enough for the time you spent speaking to therapists recently and educating them about us. I and all my 2,000 insiders applaud you, and we love you dearly, and every one of your guests who have had the courage to come forward and tell their stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, what a powerful, powerful, powerful testimony. And I'm so grateful that you've received puzzle pieces from so many people who were able to validate these things that were probably so confusing to you to find out about your life, without context of what these things mean, of being underground or seeing beings that are so foreign and things that you don't see on land. And then trying to figure out what these abuses are when this terminology that we now know, ritual abuse, satanic ritual abuse, Masonic ritual abuse, those different things, mind control. I mean, I can't even imagine how difficult that is to have these memory recollections, to not have terminology for it, to not know where to turn. Again, you go see therapists, you can go in churches, and a lot of people are not trauma informed as to what someone like you has gone through to even know how to help, even if they care to listen. So it's so amazing what you have been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time, and the amount of time that you have spent learning and educating yourself and familiarizing yourself with what these things are and having the courage to peel back those veils within yourself to learn more. I'm sure that was really scary to have all those memories, and you do have a family and you have a husband, and there's so many different elements to this of keeping your life together while you're going through this and navigating it and hoping that the people that were with you stay with you through it. That's not always the case. And I'm so grateful that you've had a steadfast husband and that you were able to find communities with Lisa Meister and connect with people like Gray and Carrie and Nathan to get validation for these really obscure parts of your story that you couldn't go to a therapist and share. And you are just such an amazing woman with all that you've overcome. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your healing journey as well, because I think it's beautiful how at such a tender age, when you were so young, you had that connection with God at that Billy Graham crusade that you went with your mother, because of your grandmother's recommendation, and I love that that was sort of like the first time that you rebelled too. I think that that's so fun that despite everything, even at that young age, you were like, no, I'm gonna do this. I don't care. That shows like just your spirit. You've always had that unbreakable spirit ever since you were conceived. And I think they knew that to an extent, that you could never be broken. And you've proven that over and over and over and over and over again. And I love those little elements in your story, even being in the tunnels, they tried to scare you and you overcame that with sharing the gospel to everything down there. That was probably extremely terrifying, and hopefully you gave some hope to some of those really tortured souls down there that the world will never know about. And I really applaud you for your courage to share all of that. And I wanted to ask, regarding your walk with God and your faith, did you struggle when you started remembering all of this? Did you go through any type of struggle of why me, God, why me? And sort of having to rebuild that faith? And if so, like what did that journey look like for you in keeping your faith as you were going through this really tumultuous time of realizing that your life was not what you thought it was?
Yes, I really did struggle with that. I really spent a lot of time asking God why, and um, because there's anytime you have ritual abuse, you have blackmail. And, I was made to um, kill Thaddius. I didn't go into this part, but I was also made to kill my handler because he betrayed my trainer and got her arrested. And I was also forced to have sexual behavior with other children between the ages of 9 and 11. I molested other kids. And so carrying around that kind of shame really takes a toll on you. In the last 5 years, my hair has gone completely gray and half of it has fallen out because of the stress of processing these issues. And for some reason, every time I'm working in the kitchen, I have flashbacks of hurting those other children. And so it's a trick of the enemy to try and derail me. And I often have to stop cooking bacon so I can go read my Bible, because that's the only thing that helps. And so, yes, I did ask why. And it wasn't until Jesus gave me that vision and started bringing other survivors to me asking questions, saying, how do you cope with this? What do you do? I was also fortunate through Lisa to find a mentor named Susan. And she was the one who told me that you are not going to get through this unless you are committed to reading scripture every day and walking out the commands of Jesus. She said, if you don't live your life according to the word of Jesus, the things that he taught, then the devil is going to have a heyday with you, because the devil is like a lawyer, and he thinks that if you are sinning, that he has legal right over you. So, family, I'm here to tell you that if you are not walking according to the word of God, if you are not spending time daily in the word of God, reading it and trying with all of your strength to make sense of it, you will not have victory in your life. Those are the two things that have to happen for our sanctification, for our walk with God. We have to have a close relationship with Jesus. And you know, Jesus has met me at every single turn in this journey. At first, I wondered why I was the only one in my friend group who was saying, no, Jesus was there every time I was abused. And people were saying, well, why can't I see Jesus when I was abused? And I think it goes back to that. Are you walking the walk? And are you reading the word? And if you do those things, you will have victory, and you will see where Jesus was in your memories. Because one of the things about our beautiful, loving God is that he is omnipresent, which means he is everywhere. So he had to be where those memories happened. He had to be there. And all you need to do is look around and ask him to show himself in those memories, and you will see that he was there and he was holding you too. And Jesus also gave me a vision for how I'm to think and act towards my abusers. A little while, my mom broke into this interview calling me. And so obviously you can know that I'm still having a relationship with my mom, even though she drowned me to the point of death on multiple occasions and then did CPR to revive me. That happened in between my programming sessions so that she could keep me dissociated so they wouldn't have to work so hard programming me. Satanists are really lazy people. But the vision Jesus showed me was that I was sitting on his lap and he was comforting me after a particularly brutal rape session. And the person who had hurt me moved on to the next little girl. And I said, Jesus, you're here holding me, but where are you for that little girl? And he said, I'm holding her too. And then after that, the person doing the damage moved on to the next child, which was a little boy. And I said, so you're holding that little boy too? And Jesus said, yes. And his eyes were full of tears. And I looked up at him and I said, what about the man? Where are you for that man? And at this point, tears started rolling down his cheeks. And it took him a while to speak. But he said, I'm holding him too. And you know, the Bible says that our loving God does not want anyone to perish. It's his will that everyone would find salvation. And one thing we do not talk about, I wasn't going to talk about this, but I feel led to do it. One thing we don't talk about is how we treat our own children. And one of the reasons my daughter no longer talks to me is because when she was little, I did the same thing to her that was done to me. I have no memory of that. And that is a shame I will carry every single day this side of heaven. The shame that I hurt other girls, that I hurt my own daughter. There's some days that shame is so heavy that I can't even move. But I believe that Jesus has saved me, and I believe that he has forgiven me. And every single day, 1,000 times a day, I recite that verse that says, "There is therefore now no condemnation." And I don't know how he manages that, but somehow through his death and resurrection, he doesn't condemn me anymore. And I'm trying to walk in that. I'm trying to live that out. But it's the hardest thing I've ever done, to come to grips with that and to lose my relationship with my daughter. I did speak to one friend who thinks that maybe it didn't happen, because when my daughter first told me about it, she told me she was having a dream about it, that it happened. It was a dream. And knowing what I know now about electromagnetic frequency and how that can be used on our brains to make us have thoughts and hear voices, is it possible it was a dream? Yes, it's possible. But I don't remember it. I have no memory. And so is it completely possible that I molested my own daughter? Yes. Is it completely possible that she could speak up about it and I could go to prison? Yes. But I know that if I go to prison, that that's only because Jesus has people in there for me to share my faith with and share my story with. And so it won't be the worst thing in the world. The worst thing in the world is being kept away from my beloved daughter. And so that's where my walk with God is right now. It's a battle every day. Ever since I had my first flashback of the baby with the severed head, it has been a battle every day. And I think this side of heaven, it will still be a battle in the future. But I know I have the tools to fight what I need to fight until I get to go see Jesus.
I appreciate you sharing and being so vulnerable about that. Um, that's something a lot of survivors are afraid to talk about, but it's so common. And I know you don't know if your circumstance 100% happened or not, but regardless, it still speaks on an issue that happens no matter if it's on your own child or if you're a child or an adolescent or a teenager growing up in these networks and systems and cults, and you're made to do it regardless as part of your training. And I try to educate on that because it's really important that we understand that, yes, there are a lot of pedophiles and people who actually do genuinely get pleasure out of abuse and perpetration, but it's also part of your training that that is what you're supposed to do. Since you are born, in a sense, you are learned that you're taught that this is what you're supposed to do, what you're supposed to partake in, how a parent is supposed to treat a child. And throughout your life, you're groomed to carry that training on to your own children. And so, regardless, perpetration is a part of this, whether it is for blackmail purposes, whether it's to carry it on. It's a big part of this, and a lot of survivors carry that shame and that guilt as if it's their own. And a lot of times these are programs, this isn't something that somebody just wakes up and willingly does. This is training that you had to do this. It's something that you were forced to do against your will. It's something that parts of you were trained to do. Then they were tortured if they didn't do it. And you gave a great example too of ways that they give you a catch-22 and say, well, if you don't do it, we're going to do it anyways, and it's going to be even worse than if you just do it. They put you in impossible
Yeah.
binds, and even as parents,
Yeah.
there's consequences if you are still in these systems and you don't continue the training. There's processes of elimination of people who don't comply, even as adults and parents. You've still been targeted, even though you left the family, and or
Yeah.
in a sense, like left the abuse behind. You left an attempt to break that, but that doesn't mean that there's not still programming that thinks in your own body, that there's not parts of you that are like, all right, this is what we got to do. This is part of our training. We have kids now. This is what we have to do. And it doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah.
somebody is a pedophile. It doesn't mean that they're an abuser. It means that they were taught that this is what you do, that this is part of what you do as a parent. This is part of what you do as a child. This is part of what you do as an adolescent. It's part of training. It's basically, in a really sick way, it's no different than anything else that we learn growing up. Like if you were to go play a musical instrument, there's stages of learning for you to get good at it. And unfortunately, they treat perversion in the same way, where they put you through training to become more and more perverted and to eventually, lose that will and that the ability to say no. Like they make it so you comply all the time. And I really appreciate you shining a light on that, because I know that that's such a hard topic that so many feel guilty about, but it also gives people validation that, oh, I'm not alone, and oh, they went through this too, and there's so many of us who have went through this. This wasn't our fault. This was the adults' fault. And the people who made the adults do this, like it was part of our training, and it's wrong. It doesn't mean that, we make excuses for anybody that did it, but at the same time, we have to understand why, that it's not just like these random acts of pedophilia. It's a system, it's a training, it's a program, and it's ways, there's specific things that you do to mind control and to fracture a child, and your story illustrates that. Whether it's true or not, it's very true for a lot of people that have memory of it or gained memory of it, and know that they were part of their own children's abuse, and that can be horrifying to contend with, and I really pray that your daughter, if this did happen, and regardless, it seems like she believes that it did, but regardless, I hope that she comes to a point where she can see that this is a patterning and it's a program, and it wasn't your means to hurt her if it did happen, that this is a training that you received your whole life, and that there's parts of you that bought into that training and think that it's the right thing to do, and so I just want to thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that, because it helps other people feel less alone.
Thank you. Yes, that's my hope, is that people out there that are struggling with this will not feel alone.
And every time we talk about it, it helps, and it can be really healing just to get it out there. And because there's so many people who have experienced that. I've heard that from so many people that have not come on my podcast. I get a lot of emails from people who are just dying with that guilt and that shame and don't know what to do with it, and are just desperately seeking help to relieve themselves of it somehow, because it's so heavy, and I think the more we talk about this and the more we encourage other people to, we can let everybody know that you weren't alone, or that you're not alone, and that this is it's part of mind control. It's part of how they keep you going. It's part of how they get you to consent. It's how part of how they get you to obey, and ultimately it's so traumatizing that it's part of the programming and what gets you to split, so
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And something else I wanted to ask you, Freemasonry, the Scottish Rite in particular, it was a part of generationally in your lineage. And I wanted to know, is there any part of that fits into your story in particular? Was there any type of abuse in lodges by Freemasons? How does that, just in general, maybe if you have any insight on how secret societies kind of fit into this? Because that's a pattern with a lot of survivors, is they have that somewhere in their lineage.
Yes, there were a couple of times that I've been able to remember where there were lodges involved. One was just a vague flashback that I have that's kind of filled in over the last few months of being 12 years old and standing in a Freemason temple. I don't know where, but it was a big one. So it was probably in the metro area near where I lived. And I was tied to the pillars that they have in the middle of their big meeting room, one hand tied to each pillar. And I was naked, and all of the men were sitting around the floor in their full Masonic regalia. And I believe that this was a humiliation ritual because of my defiance. Like I was there to be punished. And that's all I remember. But I clearly can see every single man in the room, and the room was packed. Every man there wearing their full apron and suit and all of that weird gold jewelry around their necks. And I fully remember that. And then I also, oh, come on, brain. What was the other one? Poof, gone. I don't know.
Regarding the first
Oh,
one, oh, go ahead. I want you to share before you forget.
yeah, at my grandparents' house, it was my great grandparents' house first, and my great grandparents were all things Freemasonry. They were really evil. But um, my granny had been raised by a woman who was a druid. And so she had that as well. Um, and my grandparents, I think they just had been abused so much that they just weren't that into it. And they were more into um, having my grandfather having his career, and my granny took care of the house. She was very, very mentally ill and could barely put two thoughts together because of her abuse. She was very paranoid and saw things that weren't there and heard things that weren't there. And my family just kind of passed off this obvious schizophrenia as, oh, it's just one of Granny's stories, you know. They just always dismissed it when she really was very mentally ill and could have benefited from medication at least, if not some inpatient help. And so I know that they um, abused my dad. And I know that my dad was part of the Masonic system because when I was 16, he was taking me to my grandma's house, my good grandma. And as we were getting onto the highway, he pointed. This was when he was in full-time Christian work, by the way. And he pointed to a building and he said, "See that building? It used to be a Masonic temple, and there's a big satanic pentagram on the floor in there." And I looked right at him. I had had it. I wasn't going to have any of his BS. And I said, "Well, if you're in full-time Christian work and should never have been in a place like that, how do you know there's a pentagram on the floor?" And that just rocked his world. And he said, "I didn't think you'd be smart enough to make that connection. You know, he's got to gaslight me." And tell me I'm stupid. Um, and after that, I don't remember any of the conversation. But so yeah, there were associations. My dad, for some reason, shortly after he met my mom, he went to Switzerland, specifically Davos. And he never said anything about why he went to Davos or why he was there, but he was there for like a month and a half. So, of course, my brain goes to the World Economic Forum and what the heck was he doing there? Um, so who knows? But
And
that's the Freemason connection for me.
do you remember any of your family members at that first event that you just talked about a moment ago, or how you got
I
there?
My grandfather was there, but I think he was begging for mercy for me. I don't know. I'm not sure if he was participating or if he was wanting to get me out of there. I don't know. But I know my grandfather was there.
Oh, horrific. That seems to be a big part of this equation is the secret society element, which makes sense because
Yeah.
it's a Luciferian cult robed in secrecy and blood oaths, so it does make sense
Mhm.
that this would be involved. But I think that there's kind of another layer to that, which is this Masonic ritual abuse, where there's specific rituals that are Freemasonry or whatever the type of secret society is. There's like themed rituals, whether they're inside of a lodge or somewhere where there's
Yeah.
some like paraphernalia of black and white or checkerboard patterns or pillars. And I don't think that's
Yep.
talked about enough to sort of separate that from satanic ritual abuse, that there's like actually groups of Freemasons that get together and it's mostly just men at these rituals and they're sort of themed according to whatever their secret society is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my grandparents had the checkerboard floor in their basement.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I'm sure that my great grandparents hosted rituals there. I don't know how I know that, but somehow I know that.
And you had mentioned your father was abused, which seems to make sense. This is a multi-generational, family business in a sense. I guess you could sort of cook it
Yeah.
down to. Do you know if your
Hmm.
grandparents were involved as well in abuse and if it was government mind control or if this was more, um, you know, say incest abuse that was passed down and then eventually once you were born and your siblings or your family, that once you got here, then you were put in the government mind control and not them.
Well, my dad went to the same school that I did. And so he may have had some affiliation with government mind control. To give you an idea, they didn't even bother to hide it. When my dad was a student there, their yearbook was called The Call of Pan, meaning the god Pan, and his piping to lure little boys. It was a boys' school when my dad went there. And my dad did mention toward the end of his life that there was a lot of sexual abuse that happened among the boys and among the teachers and the boys. I have four other people that I know. One I met in a Facebook group, and she was sent to summer school programs at my exact school. And then there's three other people that I know that are significantly mentally ill after being repeatedly abused by several different teachers at my school. So there's that.
How many students
And
were in your school? Was it a fairly large student body or was it a small,
no,
no, small?
my graduating class had 92 people.
And every one of them was being programmed.
I think to a certain extent, Like for me, I know that the teacher, because like I have several parts in me that can recognize DID in a person instantly. And they will, they notice it and they tell me. And so that was how, before even reading my clients' charts, I knew that they had been ritually abused too. Their parents were all heavy drug users. And with that kind of culture, there goes a lot of satanic abuse. And then when I read their charts, I was like, what are the odds, Jesus, of you sending me to a house where four of the world's sweetest people that you would ever want to know all had satanic ritual abuse? You can't make this stuff up. So, yeah.
And you
Did that
mentioned
answer your question?
it does, yes. And another thing you mentioned that corroborates so many stories that I've had on my podcast, and I'm really grateful that somebody on my podcast verified and sort of validated your experience, is the gifted and talented programs, whatever they're called for
Yeah.
your generation or the current generation. And there's obviously been many names and types of um, verbiage of what the names are and vernacular for what they're called. But do you recall any field trips taken on these programs too? That seems to also be something a lot of people have memories of, are kind of obscure field trips in these gifted programs.
Yeah. The only one I remember is going to a farm, and I remember being on the bus to the farm, but that's all I remember. And there's a lot. I've just recently found out through researching it again, there are a lot of podcasters who are asking this question now. Were you in the gate programs? What do you remember? Do you remember anything at all? And most people are like, yep, I was in that program. Nope, no memory. We had to drink the cup of medicine, and all the memories were gone after that. And so many of people in the gate that were in the gate programs have those exact same memories. We all validate each other. No, we don't remember anything, except there was a cup of medicine. We had to take a nap on a mat. Something bad happened to me because my private parts hurt after that. And we all, I mean, everywhere. This is on Facebook, this is on Instagram, this is on YouTube. If you just search in any browser gate programs, you'll get way more information than you ever wanted to know about this.
Yes. And even people that weren't in government mind control, they were just going to school regularly and never had the types of abuse that you did and weren't in these networks, still don't remember what happened to them in these programs. So
Right.
like, I remember everything about my childhood. I can tell you everything, except I do not remember
Mm-hmm.
what happened after I walked in the doors of that classroom. I remember walking out.
Yep.
I have no idea what happened to me while I was inside of it. And it's like, why is that? Like, what are they doing to kids in these classrooms that
Yeah.
the majority don't remember almost a single memory? And if they do, it's just these very obscure things. Oh, I do remember a headphone, or I remember frequencies, or I remember that pink drink, like you said, and they're all the
Yeah.
same. It's all the same memories,
Yep.
like what you were just saying.
Mm-hmm. And, I know why, but it begs the question, why is this not front page news? Why is everybody not talking about this? And that is because our government is the single largest consumer of child pornography and child trafficking. Everybody that I've ever heard give a podcast about child trafficking, there's a guy named Jamie Walden who worked in the Dominican Republic with his wife and counseled kids that had been used in trafficking. And they were told by the cops that helped them with this that you better not dig too deep because all of this goes back to the American government. And if you go too deep on this, you are going to die. And so that is why this is not front page news. That is why 8 million children are not missed, is because our government is the single largest consumer of child trafficking.
It funds their operations, the money that they get.
Yes.
It's more profitable than drugs, and people don't want to think about that. That a child can
Yes.
be reused and that it's basically looked at as a commodity. It's not a human, it's a product that you pass around and you get money for.
Right. Well, and then back to the organ donation thing. Why do traffickers have to have an organ harvesting team on standby for when the child is raped within an inch of its life and dying? Why do they have to harvest those organs? It can't be just because they get money on the black market for the organs, because there's so much logistics involved in shipping organs around the country. There's no way those organs are viable when they get there. And we are fed this line of bullshit as nurses. Oh, you've got to request the donation. Oh, you've got to let our person request the donation because they're trained in requesting it. And it is a load of crap. There's something very bad going on underground with those organs, and I personally think that they're feeding something down there with it.
That's horrifying to think about. Do you have any speculation of what that could be?
um yeah, I do. I remote viewed it. It's a dragon. Back in 1953, Eisenhower, and this is a big conspiracy theory. It hasn't been proven, but supposedly Dwight Eisenhower met with aliens and gave them permission to do alien abductions and quote unquote experiments on people. And I think that somewhere in that agreement, which was a legal agreement giving these aliens slash demons, whatever you want to call them, giving them access to the American people, um, I believe in that agreement was also you have to feed the beast.
And
You
think
know, in the book of Job, God says to Satan, "Where have you been?" And Satan says, "I've been wandering to and fro throughout the center of the earth." He's down there.
that's horrifying to think about. And speaking of that, do you recall memories of interacting with advanced technology, craft, the things that we call UFOs? That also seems to be a commonality in this community that these children, because of their ability to compartmentalize, to keep secrets, because the amnesia, that they were used in a lot of these advanced technological experiments, even aliens. A lot of survivors say that they actually encountered aliens, or at least what we think are aliens. Do you have any experiences you remember about any of those things?
I do, yes. The demons that were crawling on my bed that were attached to the goblet that my mother sent me, those were exactly like giant. They would be the big grays. So that's why I use the term aliens and demons in are same, but all the ones that I've seen are the exact same thing.
And then any type of technology that you remember?
And that's also, I don't remember any flying crafts or anything like that. And that's okay. I don't want to see them. But I also think part of the reason that I have not been more bothered by those things is because of the Holy Spirit in me. I think they're not allowed. I have asked Jesus to anoint the corners of my property and the doorposts and windows of my home, and they're not allowed here. So I don't ever have a moment's trouble on my property or in my home since I got rid of that glass.
Amazing. And I wanted to see, can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned you and your husband and obviously your children, but there's been a lot of targeting that you've experienced. Could you talk a little bit about that and how moving away from this, extracting yourself from the cult, breaking that cycle, what has happened as far as like retaliation and stuff like that, and just, electronic frequencies, and have you experienced any of those different things yourself, the
Yeah,
V2K? Yeah.
yeah. I know now that we have. I know that when I took all those pills, that was V2K. Because it was not a voice that I'm used to hearing. Wasn't one of my insiders, and it wasn't the Holy Spirit and wasn't Jesus. Those are the voices that I hear in my head, and it wasn't them. Um, it was a voice that gave me chills, and I know it was evil. Also, my husband struggles with major, major depression. He has our entire, well, almost all of his life. And he says it's like, um, he'll think on a Bible verse and he'll be mulling it over in his mind. And for a while, he feels better, almost like he might be going to have a happy thought. And then all of a sudden, boom, into his head, he gets depressed again. He has depressive thoughts and he can't keep them at bay. And that to me is also from electromagnetic frequencies. He doesn't believe me, he disagrees. But if you were to interview him about his life, he did time in the military, and got quite high up. He was supposed to be a bodyguard to Caspar Weinberger during the Reagan administration. And they sabotaged his career and tossed him out. And so then he went to the law enforcement academy, and he enjoyed a good career there for a while. And then he wouldn't play ball with the evil people. And so they sabotaged his career. And he thinks it was just random stuff.
It
But
can be
after
so
a
hard.
while, you can connect the dots and you're like, there's no way that many bad things. I mean, and he and I have been through literal living hell in our lives, from health problems to, I mean, there was a time he was so depressed, he didn't get out of bed for like 3 months. And, some really bad things happened during that time. And I know him. I know he did those things against his will. It was not his fault. He would never do things like that. And so, yes, we have been targeted individuals as a family. I believe they're still targeting my daughter. Um, she was surrounded by people at college who convinced her that her dreams were real and her family was toxic. And she's one of those college students who gave up her entire family because other people told her to,
Oh, it's horrible how this stuff
which
breaks up
is,
families.
yeah, yeah, yep.
And so as far as your healing, you seem to have a very organized system in a sense where you don't seem at odds with yourself. And I'm sure there's still internal turmoil and conflict, and there's still healing that you're doing. But you had expressed earlier
Oh,
that
yeah.
obviously
I was,
there's, oh, go
I
ahead.
was going to tell you about this.
Yeah, let's talk about
So, me and my insiders figured out how, because they weaponized my imagination against me and against all the people I was supposed to kill, um, I told you I made some insiders on my own. We figured them out, and they are safe and wonderful people, and they love the Lord. And whenever we've had an insider that was having suicidal or homicidal thoughts, those lovely insiders go and gently get the one who's having the troubles. And they take them to the safe room that Jesus built in our mind. And while they're there, there's four giant angels guarding the doors inside and out. So if you're in there, you can't leave. But if you're outside, you can't get in either. So it's totally safe. And my insiders that are having trouble go meet with Jesus in the safe room. And I don't know what they do there. I don't know what Jesus said to them, but I don't need to know because I trust that he's going to take care of them. And they always come back smiling. And so that way we've been able to ward off a lot of problems that most people with DID have, where you have inappropriate or abreactions to different triggers. And so by using my imagination to have them meeting with Jesus, we have experienced faster healing and better healing than a lot of my peers have. And so, yes, thank you for asking that question because I really wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, and I love your perspective, how you were saying that even full integration has been sort of a narrative that they've pushed on survivors when that's not necessarily the case for everybody. A lot of times cohesion and teamwork and helping everybody work together, not just integrating, is the goal. And that's really important that you're acknowledging
Yeah,
parts and giving them safe spaces instead of just shoving them down again and silencing them, that you're giving them a safe
yeah,
space to, heal and to nurture, where they can't be touched by the outside world. And I love that you've done that. That's really interesting.
yeah. Well, and because they behave so much better than they used to, I'm able to trust them. And so I have someone available for every situation that comes up. And so we're able to handle most things with grace and dignity and with the love of Jesus because of that.
That's so wonderful. I could tell how much healing and like how I guess fast you figured things out just from Lisa's podcast. You had started disclosing publicly mere months after you had really started kind of getting a grasp on all of this and remembering.
Yeah,
And it was really amazing hearing how put together you were even on her podcast. You're able to articulate things so well, even from having just stumbled into all of this and you're learning about it. And so that's incredible, even to see how far you've come since then in this. I can tell your confidence and, this cohesion within you and that you've done so much healing to be able to now speak about this in a really strong way that's educational and that's empowering, and that you've had your faith, tested, but you've never walked away from it. You've really stood firm with knowing where you need to go and holding on as much as you can, even if it's by a thread sometimes. You've never let that go and have just continued to have hope for yourself. And you've continued to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, even when it gets dark. And I'm grateful that you've had, a loving husband there for you, even if he, doesn't fully understand
yeah,
everything
me
that's
too.
going on. It's amazing that you have that. So many survivors don't have that love or a companion as they're going through this, and I can't even imagine how
Yeah,
hard that would be.
yeah, yeah, that would be really tough.
And is there anything else that you wanted to share today that we didn't get to talk about?
I don't think so. I think that was all of it.
I could probably talk to you for hours more. You have such an inspiring story and you've remembered so much, and maybe we could do this again. I'm sure other people will have questions of
Yeah,
things that maybe they'd want to know from you. And I know that your story and the different things that you've went through are going to help validate the things that other people have went through. So I'm just really blessed to know you, Kate. Thank you for all your support too of this podcast and for all these other survivors out there. You're constantly, their cheerleader and lifting them up. And You've been such a big supporter of my podcast and my own journey, which encourages me to keep going because it's not easy for me either. I can't imagine how difficult it is for you and others to keep going after what you've experienced, knowing how hard it is for me to keep going sometimes, but it's with your encouragement and your support and seeing, just what a difference that this makes. And I appreciate you always sharing that and lifting everybody up and for being such a light in the darkness for everybody, and I'm so grateful that now we get to come and embrace you and love you and lift you up the same way that you've done for so many years. So thank you with all my heart for speaking out, for sharing your story, for being vulnerable, for being supportive, and for keeping me going and giving me encouragement whenever I felt down. And, those little things that you've done have made such a difference in my journey too.
Oh, thank you, Emma. I'm glad to hear that.
And is there anywhere on social media that you are that people can connect with you or any way that people could reach you if they want to talk to you or connect with you or even talk to you about, I know you do your survivor groups, which maybe you could talk about that a little bit if there's room for other people to join or if people could reach you some way to join that?
The people that I talk to online, I do that through Facebook Messenger.
Okay.
And my Facebook name is Panda Pearl, with a space between Panda and Pearl. Panda was my beloved horse that I had for years, and Pearl is my cat that I have now. So that's where the names come from.
Okay, so Facebook would be the best place for them to reach you to connect and or to connect with you about your ministry and in joining your support group.
Right. Yeah, I pretty much do it individually with people
Okay.
right now. I guess until this very moment, I've never thought of starting a group because there's so many great groups out there already. There's a group that I belong to on Facebook called Severe Ritual Abuse. Um, and then I guess Lisa's is by invitation, so I won't say what her group is, but there's a lot of really good groups on Facebook for people that are going through this.
Wonderful. Well, I encourage people either way to connect with you, just even if to just support and like your content and share the things that you post. Like I said, you're constantly lifting up others and sharing content, and I think that you're a ray of light and somebody that we need to come around now and support one way or another, and support your content and lift your voice up and continue to. And encourage you guys to share this episode. We all know people waking up. It's a really amazing time right now. Sometimes it doesn't feel like people are waking up fast enough, but if you actually look, there's people waking up faster than ever in history, which is really encouraging. So if you know somebody who could benefit from hearing this episode, if you know survivors who might be able to have their story corroborated through Kate's story, please share this episode too with them. Share it on your feeds if you're on Facebook or Twitter. This does get heavily censored. I've had my channel terminated multiple times off YouTube and other platforms, just for sharing about survivor testimonies. And it's really sad that it gets labeled bullying or harassment or conspiracy when, abusers have all the followers and there's a lot of people out there that aren't good people who are not being taken off platforms, and there's a lot of sexual abuse material that's proliferating. So I always say let's get louder with survivor testimonies and let's just keep trying to share and get the word out, because the news, the media, social media, they're never going to elevate this for us. We have to do it, and there's so many amazing people like Kate now stepping up to offer their testimony, their corroboration, and to share this hidden knowledge with all of us that has been hidden for way too long. So I'll have all my links in the show notes. I'm going to have Kate's Facebook page linked for you guys to go connect with her. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you guys so much for listening. God bless you, and we will see you next time.